Welcome to This Just In with This Just In, Justin Core as your host. This is a show where we take a deeper dive into the stories most important to you with the people who bring you those stories or people at the center of those stories. And the latter is true with our guest today, our correspondent, a first-time guest, a former co-worker of mine, a woman who has one of the hardest jobs on the planet, Boise's Director of Housing and Homelessness Policy, Nicki Olivier Hellenkamp. Nicki, thanks for coming.
Good morning, Justin. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We are going to talk about the housing crisis. You have heard of it. You're familiar. Fantastic. But first, I ask all my first-time guests this. What would your walk-up music or your entrance music be?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to go with Seven Nation Army.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Even just the beat would be sufficient.
Bum, 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 bum. That's the one.
Yep.
Yeah, that's all we can afford. I shouldn't hum anymore. Any particular reason? Just
No,
love
I think,
the beat.
yeah.
Sets the tone.
It sets the tone.
Sets the tone. Fantastically. Do you remember the first time we talked about that question?
I do. I remember your song. I remember it was my Private Idaho.
Yes.
The same song that the Idaho Steelheads.
Yes. By the B-52s, yeah. Wah, wah, wah. It's kind of corny, but so am I. So we talked about that on some sort of big teams meeting as like an icebreaker. And I'm like, oh, it's definitely that. So I guess I'm stealing that from the city of Boise. So
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Also, speaking of music, sometimes I remember, was it Wednesdays or Thursdays? I sat down the hall from y'all and two other people who worked in the office there, the mayor's office, and I would just hear kind of 90s. Now that's what I call music coming out of the office. And it's
yes.
this is what we do, to help propel us through the week. We sing along to all these old songs. Sorry, not old. Not old at all. Those songs aren't old. But anyway, you are local. Grew up in Boise.
Sure did.
That is awesome. What do you miss most about those days, about that time, as far as Boise goes, and what do you not miss?
Yeah, I mean, this is a cliche for kids who grew up in Boise, but the Camel's Back Playground, the old one, I certainly miss, although I do not miss burning my legs on the metal slides in the summer.
Yes.
Yeah. And
kids built different back then. We could handle that stuff because we had
it's true. Yeah, there was no choice. Yeah, and I remember writing a petition to my elementary school principal in 6th grade when they replaced the sand in the playground with wood chips. Because I felt it was
a good idea.
It seemed like a terrible idea. There were splinters involved, and he was like, "Well, no one's going to break their arm anymore, Nicki. So I think we're going to stick with the wood chips."
Will they not? Wood chips aren't that great of a cushion. And then also you're guaranteed to get some sort of infection.
Yeah, it was trade-offs. It's all about the trade-offs.
Fantastic. Well, a lot has changed in Boise since then, including you from Boise. You went to an Ivy League school.
That's true.
No big deal. Penn. How'd you get in?
Yeah, I mean,
You're wicked smart.
I grew up here and I got to go to the Boise Public Schools. And I mean, if you let me, I would sit here and shout out every single teacher I had from kindergarten at Washington Elementary all the way up through my senior year at Boise High. And I was surrounded by just excellent educators. And I think more importantly, though, by a community full of caring adults. And that was, every coach, choir director, the local foundation that gave me a scholarship to help me pay for college expenses, and things like when I was in high school, I got rear-ended, and there were people around who jumped out of their cars to come help me. This is a community that really, growing up here, you have the sense that the adults around you are going to look out for you and take care of you. And that's so much of, I think, the foundation for me of all the opportunities that I've had and everything that I've been fortunate to get to do.
Now it seems like very much in your role you're trying to look out for the community, that same community that looked out for you. From there, let's see, you went to the University of Washington as well, got your degree in social work, because I guess you just like to do the toughest work imaginable.
Yeah. So my first job out of college was for a service provider nonprofit, and I worked with a lot of social workers. And I just thought that they were the coolest people. You know,
Nice.
you're talking about folks who spend their day in the messy, challenging realities of what it means to be human and to be human around other humans, and just their ability to meet people where they were, to see the human in front of them as a whole person, and as somebody who was had so much potential inside of them, and were really just ready to say, how can I meet you here, and where are we going together? And it was really inspiring. So that was a lot of getting to work with social workers, was a lot of what made me want to be a social worker.
Yeah, really empathy in action. You were also a union rep for a while, and then became a housing policy manager because social work not tough enough. You looked at the housing crisis and thought, that might be a fun nut to crack. Why did you decide housing policy was your niche?
Yeah, so when I went to college in Philadelphia, and like I said, I grew up here. And moving to Philadelphia, it was really the first time that I witnessed visible homelessness in a way that just didn't exist to that scale in Boise. And part of that was that I was really frequently asked for money on the street.
Yeah.
And trying to decide what to do in those moments as a 19-year-old, who this was brand new as an experience, I was just left with a lot of questions of what's the right thing to do, what responsibility do we have to each other as humans when we're in need, and I really wasn't satisfied with any of the answers that I could come up with to that question. And so my first job out of college, I went to work for a homeless services provider, and that also provided supportive housing for folks who had disabilities, often had really challenging mental health issues, and needed kind of ongoing support. And in that work, I got to see what it meant in people's lives to have a safe, healthy, and affordable place to live. And really got to, build relationships with people whose lives were transformed by having housing. And it was meaningful work, and it infused in me just a very deep belief that this is an incredibly important issue for our community.
Yeah, well, and certainly an issue for the community, but that those people aren't just a problem to fix, right? They're human beings, they're our neighbors, they are people who need this because our community needs this. You're also a civil rights analyst for the city of Seattle. Talk to me about the connection you think between housing and civil rights.
Sure. So one of the things that we did at the Office for Civil Rights is enforce the Fair Housing Act, which is a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And, up until relatively recently, until 1968, in a lot of the country, discrimination in housing, whether that's rental, ownership, or the financing of housing, it was legal to discriminate against people, based on their race, their sex, whatever it was. And so the enforcement of civil rights law, a big part of it is housing related. The thing that I'll say, though, that I also thought was really interesting about that work is that I'd been working, like you said, in housing policy before then.
Right.
And policy work is often about passing new laws or creating new policies, right? And there's an old saying that says that passing a new policy or a new law is like the wedding, and then the implementation is like the marriage. And so it's fun to when look, we did something. We've got a new thing. We've made this difference, and you don't actually know that you've made a difference in the lives of anyone, and you don't know whether you've made the change that you hope to see until it comes to the implementation. And so getting to really see, as a civil rights analyst, what does it look like when we actually implement some of the protections that we've placed in law?
Yeah.
What does it mean? How does it play out for people? Does it have the intended effect? And so getting to see some of that implementation work definitely impacts the way that I look at my policy work today.
Sure. And as someone who has done political comms before, I can tell you the messaging there for new policy, new laws, whatever, is like, hey, this is a thing now, and that problem is fixed right now because we passed that law. And the real truth is, like, well, now we got to actually put it into action, and then you find maybe some tweaks that need to be made and things like that. So more than 4 years ago, you settled back in Boise as Mayor McLean's housing advisor, now director of Housing and Homelessness Policy. How awesome was it to come back to Boise?
Oh, it was the best.
Yeah.
It was just the absolute best. Yeah. When I was in high school, the Idaho Statesman would run short little snippets, shout out to so-and-so, they placed 7th at state, in the discus or
Yes,
whatever it
right,
was, right?
yes.
And there was one that was about me, my junior year of high school, just a little couple lines about something. And the then mayor of Boise, sent me a note, and it had the clipping from the Statesman, and just a little card that said, here's a small notice of a big accomplishment. If you leave Boise for college, please come home. We need you here. And that was, I'm sure that his office sent those notes out to a lot of kids. But it really meant something to me. And I kind of held on to it, and it stayed in the back of my head of, I want to go out. I want to learn. I want to see how things work in other parts of the country, because I want to be able to come home, and I want to be able to work, for this city.
And then did you use that letter as part of your cover letter when you interviewed for the job in Boise? It's like, pretty much already promised me this job, so you kind of have to hire me. It's right here. Yeah.
No, that would have been smart.
You got the job anyway. Don't worry about it. Well, much more about the housing crisis in and around Boise with Nicki right after this. Welcome back to This Just In with This Just In. Justin Korn, Boise's Director of Housing and Homelessness Policy, Nicki, Olivier, Hellenkamp. Nicki, thank you again for being here. I talk a lot about the housing crisis in my Growing Idaho series. You can see that on ktvb.com. For people, though, unfamiliar, what is the housing crisis?
Sure. So in simple terms, here in Boise and across the country, there are so many people who are really struggling with affording a place to live. And that can look like people who are paying most of their income toward their housing costs, whether that's their rent or their mortgage, and as a result are kind of precariously housed because so much of their income is just focused on keeping a roof over their head, that when some kind of other emergency comes up, your kid breaks your leg, your car breaks down, you lose a job, whatever it is, that this becomes something that threatens your housing stability and not just an inconvenience. So that's certainly a big component of it. Another is just that home ownership has become so hard for people to get into as housing costs have gone up. And as a result, we have many more people competing in the rental market, and that, of course, drives rents up. And that's not the only thing that drives rents up, but for both on the home ownership side and on the rental side, just a real challenge for so many residents of Boise and so many people across the country to just maintain their homes.
And I think you've talked about it a bit there, and I don't know if I had this later on in the rundown, but we might as well talk about it now. Like, this is a problem nationwide in all different sizes of communities. You talked about being in Philadelphia and seeing a real homelessness issue there. But I lived for a while in a much smaller city. It was maybe about 125,000 people, and there was a big housing crisis issue there, and you saw homelessness and people looking for some money to try to make ends meet on pretty much every major street corner. So can you talk about that, about the fact that this is all over, that this is not necessarily a uniquely Boise issue? Absolutely.
I mean, the housing crisis is really driven by macroeconomic forces, right?
Yeah.
That are, as we see people migrate, as we see interest rates rise and fall, as we see the construction labor market, respond to the needs or not respond to the needs, as we see challenges in terms of the cost of land and the cost of building materials. These things are all coming into play, and a single city like Boise has some tools that are available to us, but I think it's important to recognize that the things that we are challenged with here really are all over the country, things that cities, counties, states are grappling with.
Yeah. Is that some level of comfort that it's like, well, nobody's been able to figure this out? Or is that more pressure like, wow, nobody's been able to figure this out?
Maybe a little of both.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that Boise, and I've heard this referenced before, does Boise have a homelessness problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that housing here is so expensive that we have residents of our community who can't afford to keep a roof over our heads is that's absolutely a problem. Sure. And something, along those lines is that every year there's what's called the point in time count, and that happens in communities across the country where volunteers and service providers try to count the number of people experiencing homelessness in their community. And that's something I've volunteered for the last several years. And the first year that I did it, one of the things that you do as a volunteer is you help people to fill out a short demographic survey. And one of the questions on the survey is, what's the zip code of the last place you were stably housed? And the first couple people that I spoke to, when I came to that question with them, they gave me my zip code, the zip code I grew up in, and the zip code where I live currently. And that was something that really drove home for me, something that I knew, but it became really real as I was sitting with folks that these are literally our neighbors. Yeah. Like we're talking about members of our community. We're talking about the kid who sits next to my kid in school, and this isn't something that that is unique to Boise, but it is affecting Boiseans deeply, and it absolutely is a problem that we will continue to work on.
As you are working against homelessness and the housing crisis, you are somewhat limited in what you can do as a city, and those ordinances you can pass. You cannot pass state laws or really change those. What cannot you do as a city?
Sure. So something that residents frequently bring up is, isn't there some way that we can cap rents? Can't we
Rent
say,
control,
like, you just can't raise rents over a certain amount? And the answer is no, that's not an option. That's not allowed under Idaho state law. It's not something that's done in Idaho. So that's not something that's on the table. Some of the things that the city can do and does when it comes to assisting and supporting individual households, we have a mortgage assistance program. We also partner with community organizations to try to help people stay in their homes when they're facing eviction or they're running into a problem with their housing quality, that it's no longer a safe place for them to live. The city has a home repair program to try to help in that situation. But I think the reality is that we've got a supply problem, right? And so we can try to make people more competitive in a very competitive market. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, if you don't have enough places that people can actually afford, that's not going to be the solution.
So it's just about getting more housing available.
So that's definitely an important piece of the puzzle. Yeah. So making sure that we have more housing available and having it available at all across the spectrum of price points, because a healthy community is one that has folks at all different income levels.
Right.
So wanting to make sure that we have housing that is affordable to people who are taking care of our kids, the people who are taking care of us when we go to the doctor,
right.
People who are really, making our community work. That we need to make sure that we have places that folks at all incomes can afford.
Right. So help for folks who need a little bit of help, a lot of help, and also don't need help.
Yep.
Yeah, housing options there. Speaking of that, here's a look at your most recent groundbreaking, more than 200 affordable units right off Fairview. Some pictures from that. There's the mayor. How long does it take to get to this point? Because this is all awesome. People are like, oh, they made this decision, maybe a week or two ago, and then started clearing some dirt.
Yeah, so this property was purchased in 2022.
Wow.
And in 2023, the city and Ada County announced a partnership to jointly fund this project. And the partnership went far beyond us, because this type of affordable housing development costs a lot more than the city of Boise or Ada County can afford, even when we are pitching in together.
Yeah.
So the partnerships include a private developer who actually is in charge of building and operating the affordable homes that will be built there, and they're also in charge of pulling together the rest of the financing, which is millions and millions of dollars. Yep. So that's applying for federal funds, that's coordinating other funding sources. It really is the level of partnership that's required in order to make this work is very complex. Yep. And as a result, it's also real slow.
Yes. What's the goal for affordable housing in Boise numbers-wise?
Yes.
And can you get there?
So back in 2021, we set a 5-year goal of 1,250 newly constructed affordable homes, and I believe that with the help of many members of our community, that we will get there in that 5 years. But I think it's important to remember that 5-year goal, it's a milestone. It's not the finish line. 1,250 new affordable homes isn't going to be enough for the level of need that we have in our community.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of additional work to be done.
Yeah. So y'all are going to hit your goal, but there needs to be more housing and affordable housing and workforce housing coming from other places.
Absolutely.
Now, here's a look at a very well-attended Boise Design Review Committee, not just because they're always exciting, but many neighbors unsupportive of a different 200-plus unit affordable housing development on Fairview. And they had some valid concerns, a lot of it about traffic, parking. But again, we talked about how critical it is to increase that supply. How do you balance that? How can you take into account neighbors' concerns when creating this affordable housing?
Absolutely. I think it's really important that neighbors share their concerns about any kind of development, because what we've seen is that neighbors' concerns and the questions that they raise, they make the developments better because they notice things that other people might not. They know their community. Yeah. And so it's important that those concerns be heard, be brought forward. We've also taken in a lot of community feedback, for example, in the years of community outreach that led up to the passage of the modern zoning code, that Boiseans want to see a community that is walkable, bikeable, that is has a variety of housing options,
right,
and also a community that respects its open spaces and doesn't grow out into our farmlands and forests, a community where we aren't all trapped in our cars all the time.
Right.
And so balancing, that community feedback is really what shaped the modernization of our zoning code. So balancing that broader community feedback with specific neighborhood feedback is absolutely, a challenge, but a really important one to grapple with. One of the things that I think is important to emphasize and notice here is that what many of us are doing all the time is trying to protect something we love, and more specifically, a place that we love.
Yeah.
And it is scary when something that you love is going to change. Mm-hmm. And something that I think is important to recognize is that if we, for example, as a city say, you can't put an apartment building here, mm-hmm, because it'll change the neighborhood, we may protect the physical aesthetic of the neighborhood, and the neighborhood will look similar to how it always has. But the neighborhood itself is going to fundamentally change because the people who could afford to live there a generation ago will no longer be able to afford to live there. And that, that is that the people who make up the fabric of our community, our neighbors, each other, like that is the part of Boise that I think we heard from many residents they're very concerned about. Right. They're worried about a community in which their own kids aren't going to be able to afford a home when they grow up, and they say, well, hold on a second, I always expected to live within driving distance of my grandkids. What do you mean they're not going to be around here? Yeah. And so when we make these decisions, they have trade-offs. They're complicated. And not to get too wacky on you, but the quote that I often think of is by Niels Bohr, and he said,
of course,
the most quotable of all yes. physicists. He said the opposite of a fact is a falsehood, but the opposite of one profound truth may very well be another profound truth. So there's something here that I think as a community, it's easy to get broken into, you think this and I think this, and so we're going to fight with each other.
Right.
But these issues are complicated.
Yeah, where it's people who are like, look, I want this, but not in my backyard. And it's like, well, we understand, but maybe it has to go here. And you talked about growth. A lot of people just say, hey, we don't want this city to grow anymore because it's changing. And I love Boise. A lot of people like you grew up here, and they miss, those slides that would burn your legs. But boy, change is just a constant. It seems. I am not a physicist. I am not Niels Bohr, but I assume that to be the case in my time as a reporter and a resident here. All right, we're going to wrap up this Just In with Nicki Hellenkamp right after this. Welcome back to This Just In with Boise's Director of Housing and Homelessness Policy, Nicki, Olivier, Hellenkamp. Nicki, we can just put a bow on this thing now, talking about housing and the housing crisis and homelessness and the constant of growth. Also, along with that, how can people get a hold of you or the city to make their voice heard?
Sure. So lots of ways to get a hold of the city. If you've got a specific issue that you want to reach out on, you can always contact the mayor's office through our website. But also, please respond to our surveys, come to our community events, comment on social media, however it is that you want to get in touch with us. We're ready to talk.
Yeah, all that can make a difference with policy and y'all's plans. I've seen that firsthand. So, Nicki, thank you again for joining me here on This Just In. If you have a comment or a question about growth or whatever, text them to 208-321-5614. Use the hashtag JustIn. Maybe you want to share a quote from your favorite physicist. Probably not going to be as good as that one from Niels Bohr. Nicki, you're amazing. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming back home to Boise. We do need you here.
Thanks so much, Justin.
See you next time on